The hum of the U.S. Vanguard's engines was a comforting sound to Commander Talia Royce. She stood on the bridge of the battleship, her gaze fixed on the vast expanse of stars beyond the viewport. This wasn't her first tour of duty in deep space, nor her first encounter with the galactic powers that shaped their universe. But it was the first time she felt the weight of representing humanity in a galaxy that often saw them as a threat, an unknown variable, and occasionally, a savior. Around her, crew members moved with disciplined efficiency, monitoring the ship's systems, adjusting the ship's trajectory, and preparing for the upcoming mission briefing. Talia was proud of them. They were a mix of seasoned soldiers and fresh recruits, but all had volunteered to be part of the Vanguard initiative. This mission would take them deeper into uncharted space and into the heart of galactic politics, where the Galactic Council held sway. The Council was an ancient alliance, formed long before humanity had even begun to explore beyond their own solar system. It consisted of species that had established interstellar travel and civilization while humans were still living in caves. Talia had studied each species, their histories, and cultures, and she knew that humanity's recent inclusion had been a point of contention. Though Earth had joined the Council as a neutral party, the galaxy's older civilizations were wary of humans, seeing them as unpredictable and, at times, unrefined. Humanity's rapid adaptation to galactic technology, its survival on a planet considered a death world by other species, and its resilience in combat made them an enigma, and not necessarily a welcome one. Today, she was meeting with Council delegates from the Xyrix Coalition, one of the Council's most influential members. The coalition consisted of three main species: the Xyrix, tall and insectoid with a complex hive structure, the gentle, telepathic Varelians, known for their diplomacy, and the Orkara, a hardy, amphibious species that thrived on marshy, low-gravity planets. Together, they made up a formidable faction within the Council, known for their strict adherence to tradition and their shared mistrust of species with military prowess. The mission briefing began with Lieutenant Rafik Chin stepping up beside her, his usual composed expression laced with tension. "Commander Royce, we have received the initial transmission from the Xyrix delegation. They are on the verge of a civil conflict on their border worlds, and they've requested Council intervention to help maintain peace," he explained, passing her a datapad with the incoming details. Talia glanced over the report, her brows furrowing. The Xyrix weren't known for internal strife. They operated under a rigid caste system that had kept them stable for millennia. Civil conflict was practically unheard of among them. "Do we know what caused the unrest?" she asked, scrolling through the report. "Apparently, a splinter faction of the Orkara is challenging the Coalition's authority, demanding autonomy for several marsh planets," Rafik replied. "It's a territorial dispute, complicated by religious beliefs that have taken root among the younger Orkara generation. They're calling it the Rising?" Talia nodded, understanding the complexity of the situation. Religious conflicts, territorial disputes, and generational divides were familiar issues on Earth, but to the Xyrix Coalition, these concepts were alien. Their species were governed by tradition and the strict order of their societies, and the idea of internal rebellion was a nightmare that had left them scrambling. Her eyes flicked over to Rafik. "And they want humanity involved?" Rafik nodded. "They've specifically asked for a human representative as part of the peacekeeping mission. They think we can help negotiate with the Orkara dissidents, given our unique background." Unique background was Council code for humanity's violent history. While many species were unnerved by humanity's past, they had also come to respect it. Humanity's ability to balance diplomacy with strength had earned them a reputation for handling difficult negotiations and resolving disputes that others avoided. Talia's mind raced as she absorbed the implications of the mission. This wasn't just about keeping peace in the Xyrix Coalition, it was a test of humanity's role within the Council. They were being watched, evaluated on how they dealt with conflict and how they used their power. And if they succeeded, it could open doors for humanity to gain greater influence in the Council. Prepare the ship for immediate departure to the Coalition's border world, Nethar 4, Talia ordered, her voice carrying a note of authority. And inform the Xyrix delegation that we'll be bringing a small escort team to ensure the safety of the negotiations. The bridge buzzed with activity as her orders were carried out, and Rafik gave her a nod of approval. He was one of the few officers who had been with her since the beginning of her career, a steadfast ally and friend. They had fought side by side in battles against space marauders, pirates, and the occasional rogue alien faction, and Talia trusted him implicitly. As the vanguard prepared for the journey, Talia made her way to her quarters to review the information in private. The report included profiles on key figures in the Orkra dissident faction, descriptions of the conflict's history, and a detailed map of Nethar 4's landscape, a marshy, fog-covered planet with dense, treacherous terrain. It would be a challenging environment, both physically and diplomatically. Talia's gaze lingered on the image of Nethar 4, the mist-covered swamps stretching as far as the eye could see. The Orkra considered these swamps sacred ground, and she knew that any misstep could escalate tensions. It was a delicate situation, one that would require every ounce of her negotiation skills. As she studied the profiles, one name caught her attention: General Korthal, the leader of the Orkra rebels. A former soldier, Korthal had grown disillusioned with the coalition's policies and was now rallying his people to fight for independence. According to the report, he was a formidable tactician, known for his unyielding resolve and loyalty to his people. But Talia also saw hints of something else in his file: a sense of honor, a desire to protect his people at all costs. She would have to approach him carefully, appeal to his sense of duty rather than challenge his authority. The more she read, the more she felt a strange connection to Korthal. His motivations weren't so different from her own. He wanted freedom, autonomy, a voice for his people. And as much as she resented the Galactic Council's judgmental gaze, she understood that they, too, feared losing control over their carefully balanced power structure. A message alert broke her concentration, and she tapped her wrist communicator. It was Rafik. "Commander, we're approaching the coordinates for Nethar 4. The Coalition has sent a transmission detailing the protocol for our landing," he reported, his voice steady. Talia took a deep breath, mentally preparing herself. "I'll be there shortly." Minutes later, she stood on the bridge, watching as Nethar 4 loomed into view on the main screen. The planet's atmosphere was thick with fog, casting an ethereal glow over the landscape. The swampy surface was dotted with bioluminescent flora that glowed in shades of blue and green, lighting up the marshes like distant stars.
As the vanguard began its descent, Talia couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to cross a threshold, that this mission was a pivotal moment, not just for her, but for humanity's place in the galaxy. The Council had given them a chance to prove themselves, but she knew it was as much a test as it was an invitation. She turned to Rafik. "Are our delegates ready?" He nodded. "They're prepared to meet with the Coalition representatives as soon as we land. The Orkra dissidents have agreed to a preliminary meeting, but they're only allowing a small escort. They want us to come with open arms, as they put it." Talia couldn't help but smile at the irony. "Let's hope they mean it." The vanguard landed with a soft thud on the marshy ground, and the boarding ramp lowered, revealing the misty landscape of Nethar 4. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and foreign flora, a scent that reminded her faintly of Earth's rainforests. As she stepped onto the ground, flanked by her team, she felt the weight of the moment settle over her. The figures of the Xyrix and Orkra representatives were barely visible through the mist, their forms outlined by the faint glow of bioluminescent plants. It was a surreal sight, but Talia felt a calm determination take hold. This was what she had trained for, what she had devoted her life to. Humanity's place in the galaxy was still uncertain, still questioned by those who didn't understand them. But Talia knew that humanity's resilience, its adaptability, was a strength that could bridge worlds. As the representatives approached, she raised her hand in a gesture of peace, a silent promise that she was here to listen, to mediate, and, if necessary, to fight for what was right. This was the beginning of a journey that would test her resolve, her loyalty, and her vision for humanity's future. The air on Nethar was thick with humidity and tension as Commander Talia Royce led her small team through the marshy terrain. Their meeting with the Orkra dissidents had been brief and tense, ending with a tentative agreement to cease hostilities long enough to discuss a potential peace. But as Talia knew from experience, peace in a conflict like this one was rarely simple. Beside her, Rafik moved silently through the damp undergrowth, his gaze scanning their surroundings for any sign of movement. He had a knack for reading environments, whether they were the quiet corridors of the Vanguard or alien landscapes like this one. His calm presence was something Talia had come to rely on, a steady counterbalance to her own focused drive. "Anything on the scanners?" she asked, keeping her voice low. Rafik shook his head, his eyes narrowing as he checked his handheld device. "The area is clear, but I'm getting some interference. Could be the marsh gases, but it might be something else." Talia's instincts prickled. Nethar was full of surprises, and the Orkra rebels had made it clear that their truce was fragile at best. Still, she had to press forward. This mission was their chance to show the Council that humanity could be a force for stability, not just a wild card in galactic politics. Just then, a faint rustling echoed through the mist. Talia's hand moved to her sidearm, her eyes scanning the foggy swamp for movement. Rafik mirrored her movements, his posture tense but controlled. "Commander, we're not alone," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. A figure emerged from the mist, a tall, armored Orkra, his stance regal despite the worn edges of his uniform. This was General Korthal, leader of the dissident faction, and a legend among his people for his valor and unyielding spirit. His skin was an iridescent green, his features both alien and fierce, with a crown of ridged scales around his head. "Commander Royce," Korthal greeted, his voice a deep rumble that carried an air of authority. "You requested to see the heart of our struggle. I am here to show it to you." Talia inclined her head respectfully, though she kept her guard up. "General Korthal, I appreciate the opportunity. I believe that understanding each other is the first step toward a lasting peace." Korthal's gaze was inscrutable, but she could sense a flicker of respect in his eyes. "Come with me," he said, motioning for them to follow. "There is something you must see." They moved deeper into the marsh, the landscape growing darker as the bioluminescent flora faded. Strange sounds echoed from the shadows, croaks and clicks from unseen creatures that lived in the waterlogged ground. The air was thick with the scent of moss and wet earth, and a sense of unease settled over Talia. Korthal led them to a clearing where the ground was littered with the remnants of battle, shattered weapons, damaged armor, and the charred remains of alien technology. Talia's stomach twisted as she realized what she was seeing. This was a graveyard, a testament to the toll of the conflict between the Coalition and the rebels. "These are my soldiers," Korthal said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "They died fighting for the freedom of our worlds, against those who had imposed their will upon us." Talia knelt beside one of the fallen, her gloved hand brushing over a cracked helmet bearing the insignia of the Orkra dissidents. She looked up at Korthal, her expression softened by understanding. "I know what it's like to fight for freedom," she said quietly. "To stand up against impossible odds because you believe in something greater than yourself." Korthal's gaze met hers, and for a moment, they shared a silent understanding. But the moment was shattered as a warning beep sounded from Rafik's scanner. He looked up, his eyes sharp with alarm. "Commander, we've got incoming," he reported, his voice urgent. "Multiple heat signatures, approaching fast." Talia's heart raced as she rose to her feet, scanning the trees that surrounded them. The mist shifted and she saw movement, figures in Coalition uniforms, their weapons raised as they advanced on the clearing. Korthal's jaw tightened, and his eyes blazed with anger. "The Council's peacekeepers," he spat. "They're here to secure the area." Talia cursed under her breath. She knew what this was, an attempt by the Council to intimidate the rebels, to send a message that resistance was futile. But the timing couldn't have been worse. If they didn't handle this carefully, the fragile truce would collapse, and the violence would escalate. "General," "We need to pull back," she said, her tone urgent. "If we stay here, we'll be caught in the crossfire." But Korthal shook his head, his expression defiant. "I will not retreat from my own land, Commander Royce. If they want to fight, then they shall have one." Talia felt a surge of frustration, but she understood his resolve. Korthal was fighting for his people, for the right to exist without fear of oppression. She couldn't force him to back down, but she could try to defuse the situation. "Rafik, open a channel to the coalition forces," she ordered, her voice steady. "Let's try to de-escalate this before it spirals out of control." Rafik complied, his fingers flying over his communicator as he sent a transmission. Moments later, a voice crackled over the comm, cold and unyielding. "This is Captain Arik of the Coalition Peacekeeping Corps. You are in a restricted zone. Surrender immediately, or we will open fire." Talia's grip tightened on her weapon, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Captain Arik, this is Commander Talia Royce of the UES Vanguard. We are here under a council-sanctioned mission to mediate a truce. Stand down and allow us to continue our negotiations." There was a pause, and Talia could almost feel the tension crackling over the comm line. Then, Arik's voice came through again, laced with disdain. "Humans have no place here. Your presence only complicates matters. Stand down, or we will treat you as hostile." Talia's eyes narrowed, and she felt a surge of anger at his arrogance. But before she could respond, Korthal stepped forward, his voice a roar of defiance. "You come to my world, to my land, and demand that I surrender? We will never yield to your tyranny." The peacekeepers opened fire, plasma bolts searing through the mist as they advanced on the clearing. Talia and her team dove for cover, returning fire as they tried to hold their ground. The battle was intense, the air thick with the smell of burning vegetation and scorched metal. Talia moved with precision, her training kicking in as she fought to protect Korthal and his people. She could see the fear and determination in his eyes as he fought beside her, his movements fluid and fierce. Rafik covered her flank, his shots steady and controlled. He was a reliable presence in the chaos, his focus unbreakable as he held the line. Together, they fought with everything they had, their resolve unyielding in the face of overwhelming odds. But the peacekeepers were relentless, their superior numbers and advanced weaponry giving them the advantage. Talia knew that they couldn't hold out much longer, that they needed to find a way to end the conflict before it consumed them all. In a desperate move, she activated her communicator, sending a distress signal to the vanguard. They needed reinforcements, or this battle would be their last. As the transmission went out, Talia felt a surge of determination. She would not let this be the end. Not for her, not for Korthal, and not for the hope of peace. She would fight, and she would prevail, no matter the cost. The ground shook as another barrage of plasma fire struck the swampy terrain around them, sending shards of molten rock and vegetation flying into the air. Commander Talia Royce ducked behind the remains of an ancient tree, her sidearm at the ready as she surveyed the battlefield. The coalition forces were closing in, their relentless fire driving the Orkra rebels deeper into the dense marsh. Each blast lit up the thick mist with bursts of green and blue, casting eerie shadows across the landscape. "Commander, we're almost out of ammo." Rafik's voice crackled over her earpiece, tense but steady. He had taken cover just a few meters away, his face illuminated by the faint glow of his tactical screen. "At this rate, we won't last much longer without reinforcements." Talia's mind raced. They had sent the distress signal, but backup was still hours away. The vanguard was their only lifeline, but until it arrived, they were trapped, caught between coalition forces determined to crush the rebellion and the Orkra fighters whose resilience was beginning to wane. "Hold the line," she replied, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. "The vanguard will come. We just need to buy ourselves some time." Across the clearing, General Korthal fought with a ferocity that was awe-inspiring. His movements were fluid, his weapon flashing as he defended his people with everything he had. Talia could see the desperation in his eyes, the weight of his people's survival resting on his shoulders. She understood that weight all too well. But just as she thought they might have a chance to regroup, a figure stepped forward from the fog, a coalition officer, tall and imposing in dark armor that glinted in the dim light. Talia's breath caught as she recognized him. Captain Arik, the peacekeeper who had dismissed humanity as of complications in their last transmission. Arik raised his weapon, his expression cold and calculating as he surveyed the scene. His gaze landed on Korthal, and a thin smile crossed his face, a predator's smile. "General Korthal," he called out, his voice carrying over the sounds of battle. "Your resistance is commendable, but ultimately futile. Lay down your arms, and I promise your people will be spared." Korthal's jaw clenched, his hand tightening around his weapon. "We will never surrender to oppressors," he replied, his voice filled with defiance. "My people deserve freedom, not captivity." Arik's smile faded, replaced by a look of disdain. "Then you leave me no choice." Without warning, he signaled to his troops, who advanced in unison, their weapons trained on the rebels. Plasma fire erupted, and Talia's team was forced to pull back, each step costing them precious ground. Talia's heart pounded as she assessed their dwindling options. They couldn't hold this position much longer, not with the coalition pressing forward with such relentless force. She needed a plan, a way to turn the tide before they were overwhelmed. "Rafik, is there anything in the terrain we can use to our advantage?" she asked, her voice tight with urgency. Rafik scanned his tactical screen, his eyes darting over the data. "There's a natural ridge about 2 clicks north of here. If we can make it there, we'll have a better vantage point to defend ourselves." Talia nodded, formulating a strategy, even as plasma bolts whizzed past her. "Korthal," she called out, catching the general's attention. "We need to fall back to higher ground. It's our best chance to regroup." Korthal hesitated, his pride warring with the reality of their situation. But a glance at his wounded soldiers seemed to harden his resolve. "Very well, Commander. Lead the way." Together, they began a strategic retreat, covering each other as they moved through the dense marsh. The coalition forces pursued them relentlessly, their superior firepower and coordination pressing the rebels to their limits. Talia's mind worked frantically, her instincts honed from years of combat guiding her as she maneuvered her team through the unfamiliar terrain. They reached the ridge, a steep incline dotted with jagged rocks and twisted trees. It was far from ideal, but it offered some protection, a temporary reprieve in the face of overwhelming odds. As they set up defensive positions, Talia couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The coalition's attack was too aggressive, too coordinated. It felt less like a mission to secure peace and more like an extermination. And then, the revelation hit her, cold and brutal. "They're not here to negotiate," she said, her voice barely audible. "They're here to eliminate the dissidents and anyone who stands with them." Rafik looked at her, his eyes wide with realization. "You think the council sanctioned this?" Talia's jaw clenched. "I don't know. But Arik's orders are clear. He's not interested in peace, he wants complete control." Korthal overheard their exchange, his expression darkening with fury. "So, this is the true face of the council's peacekeepers. I should have known." Talia's heart ached at the betrayal in his voice, but there was no time for regret. They were running out of options and the coalition forces were closing in fast. "Listen to me," she said, her voice firm. "We may be outnumbered, but we're not out of the fight. If we can hold this position long enough, the vanguard will get here. We just need to give them something to fight for." Korthal met her gaze, his expression hard but determined. "Then we make our stand here." As the coalition forces approached, Talia's mind raced, every instinct attuned to the rhythm of battle. She had been in tight spots before, but this felt different. The stakes were higher, the cost of failure unthinkable. With a deep breath, she rallied her team, her voice steady despite the turmoil within her. "We fight for survival, for freedom, and for each other. Remember that." The first wave of coalition soldiers crested the ridge, their weapons gleaming in the faint light. Talia's team opened fire, each shot precise and lethal. Plasma bolts cut through the mist, illuminating the battlefield in flashes of green and blue. Talia moved with calculated grace, her weapon an extension of her body as she fired at the advancing troops. Her heart pounded, adrenaline coursing through her veins as she navigated the chaos, her focus unbreakable. Around her, the sounds of battle filled the air, the sharp crack of plasma fire, the shouts of soldiers, the dull thud of bodies hitting the ground. But even as they fought, the coalition's numbers proved overwhelming. They were being pushed back, inch by painful inch, their defenses crumbling under the relentless assault. Just when it seemed they might be overrun, a new sound filled the air, the unmistakable roar of engines. Talia's heart leapt as she looked up, catching sight of the vanguard descending through the clouds, its powerful guns trained on the coalition forces. "Reinforcements are here," Rafik shouted, his voice filled with relief. The vanguard opened fire, its weapons cutting through the coalition troops with brutal efficiency. Talia's team seized the opportunity, rallying as they pushed forward, the tide of battle turning in their favor. But as they pressed their advantage, a chilling realization struck Talia. Captain Arik was nowhere to be seen. Her gut twisted with unease as she scanned the battlefield, searching for any sign of him. And then, she saw him, positioned on a nearby cliff, his gaze fixed on the Nexus with a look of cold calculation. "Commander, he's going for the Nexus," Rafik shouted, following her gaze. Talia's heart pounded as she understood his plan. The Nexus was the key to controlling the region's energy resources, a power source that could shift the balance in the coalition's favor. If Arik activated it, he could turn it into a weapon, a tool to crush the dissidents, and any hope of peace. With a surge of adrenaline, Talia broke away from the battle, sprinting toward the cliff. She had no plan, no backup, only the fierce determination to stop Arik at any cost. As she closed in, Arik turned, his expression filled with contempt. "You're too late, Commander. The Nexus belongs to the Coalition." "Not if I can help it," she replied, her voice filled with steely resolve. They clashed, a brutal fight of skill and willpower. Arik was strong, his movements precise and deadly, but Talia fought with a fury born of desperation. Every strike, every blow was a testament to her resilience, her refusal to yield. In the end, it was her sheer tenacity that won out. With a final, decisive blow, she sent Arik sprawling, his weapon clattering to the ground. Breathing heavily, Talia stepped back, her gaze never leaving him. She had won, but the cost weighed heavily on her heart. The storm had gathered over Nethar for, casting dark shadows across the battlefield where humanity's hope of diplomacy had clashed with the brutal realities of intergalactic politics. The air crackled with static, a byproduct of the activated Nexus, whose power now radiated across the swampy terrain, drawing all factions to its magnetic energy. Commander Talia Royce surveyed the scene from the command post she had set up on a small ridge, her heart a steady beat of purpose. They had secured the Nexus from coalition forces in the last battle, but it had become a beacon, a symbol of power that drew hostile eyes. Coalition reinforcements had descended upon Nethar with renewed force, determined to claim the Nexus for their side, to use it as a weapon against the dissidents and assert their dominance over the galaxy. She knew what it meant if they lost. This battle was no longer about control of resources or military advantage. It was a fight for freedom, for dignity, for the right to exist without bending to the will of others. And as she looked out over her team, her friends who had followed her through fire and death, she felt a fierce, protective fire ignite within her. "Commander, coalition forces are closing in from the south and west," Rafik reported, his tone uncharacteristically tense. "They've got mechanized units and air support. They're pulling out all the stops this time." Talia nodded, bracing herself. "Then we'll pull out our own," she said, her voice filled with steely determination. She activated her communicator, signaling to the scattered forces defending the Nexus. "All units, this is Commander Royce. We hold the line here. No one backs down." Around her, the soldiers steeled themselves, gripping their weapons as they awaited the inevitable onslaught. They were a mixed company now, Orkra rebels, human troops, even some deserters from the coalition who had joined their cause. This was a battle not just for survival but for something greater, something worth fighting for. Each of them had a reason to stand against the coalition's oppression. Moments later, the coalition forces descended, their advanced weaponry gleaming ominously in the dim light. Plasma cannons erupted, lighting up the landscape with searing bolts of energy that tore through the trees and vegetation. Talia's team responded in kind, launching their own counteroffensive. Explosions thundered through the swamp, the acrid smell of burnt vegetation filling the air as both sides clashed in a deadly dance. Talia moved with precision, her weapon an extension of herself as she fired at the advancing troops. She could feel the weight of each decision, each moment, pressing down on her, but her resolve never wavered. She was here to fight, to protect those who had placed their trust in her. But as the battle raged on, she spotted a figure amidst the coalition forces, a familiar form clad in dark armor. Captain Arik had returned, leading the assault with a ferocity that matched her own. His gaze was cold, calculating, and as their eyes met across the battlefield, Talia knew that this was the final confrontation, the moment that would decide the fate of them all. With a nod to Rafik, she broke away from her team, moving swiftly through the chaos toward Arik. He met her halfway, his weapon at the ready, his stance one of rigid control. "So, it's come to this," Talia said, her voice steady. "A fight to the death." Arik's expression was one of disdain. "You always were a thorn in the Council's side, Commander. Humanity was never meant to meddle in galactic politics. Your people lack the discipline, the restraint. We fight for freedom, not control," Talia replied, her tone sharp. "Something you could never understand." They clashed, their weapons sparking as they moved in a deadly rhythm. Arik fought with brutal efficiency, each strike calculated to exploit any weakness. But Talia countered with agility and determination, her every move fueled by the lives she was protecting. The battle around them raged on, soldiers falling on both sides as the fight for the Nexus reached a fever pitch. Explosions lit up the sky, casting eerie shadows over the marshy terrain. Talia felt the exhaustion creeping into her bones, but she pushed it aside, focusing every ounce of her strength on the fight. And then, in a moment of distraction, Arik seized the advantage, landing a blow that sent her sprawling. Pain shot through her side as she struggled to regain her footing, her vision blurring as he loomed over her, weapon raised for the final strike. But before he could deliver the blow, a plasma shot rang out, striking Arik's weapon and knocking it from his grasp. Talia looked up to see Rafik standing a few feet away, his expression a mixture of relief and determination. "Thought you could use a hand, Commander," he said, offering her a quick, reassuring smile. Talia grinned, the pain forgotten as she rose to her feet. Together, they moved against Arik, their coordinated attacks overwhelming him. He fought back with desperate fury, but the tides had turned, and he knew it. With one final strike, Talia sent him crashing to the ground, his weapon skittering away into the darkness. Arik lay there, defeated, his expression one of stunned disbelief. You would betray the Council for these rebels?" Talia's gaze was steady as she looked down at him, her voice filled with quiet conviction. "We fight for justice, not for the whims of the Council." With Arik subdued, Talia turned her focus back to the battlefield, her heart pounding with a renewed sense of purpose. The coalition forces, disoriented by the loss of their leader, began to falter, their ranks breaking under the relentless assault of Talia's team. But even as victory seemed within reach, a new threat emerged. Coalition reinforcements arrived from the east, their ships descending through the clouds, their weapons trained on the Nexus. "Commander, they're going to hit the Nexus," Rafik shouted, his voice laced with urgency. Talia's mind raced. If the coalition destroyed the Nexus, everything they had fought for would be lost. She couldn't let that happen. "Rafik, get everyone to fall back," she ordered, her tone resolute. "I'm going to stop them." He looked at her, hesitation flickering in his eyes, but he nodded, trusting her judgment. "Stay safe, Talia." With a determined nod, She sprinted toward the Nexus, her weapon ready as she charged into the fray. The Coalition forces fired upon her, but she moved with a speed and precision born of desperation, her every step a testament to her unwavering resolve. As she reached the Nexus, she activated its defensive systems, channeling its energy into a powerful shield that surrounded the structure. The Coalition's blasts struck the shield, but it held, protecting the Nexus from their assault. With the Coalition forces held at bay, Talia took a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling over her. She had done it. She had protected the Nexus, saved her people, and upheld the values she believed in. But as she looked out over the battlefield, she felt a pang of sorrow for the lives lost, for the destruction that war had wrought. The true face of humanity in battle was not one of glory, but of sacrifice, of resilience in the face of darkness. As the Coalition forces retreated, defeated, Talia turned to her team, her heart heavy but filled with pride. They had survived, but the journey was far from over. The galaxy was vast, and the Council's influence loomed large. But she knew that, whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. And as she gazed up at the stars, a sense of hope blossomed within her. Humanity's fight was not over. But for now, they had won a hard-fought peace.